Today's episode of Negotiate Anything is sponsored in part by Shopify, Brevo, Cozy Earth, and Incogni. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you start, run, and grow your business. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/Kwame. Brevo is an all-in-one marketing and CRM platform to help you connect with customers and grow smarter. Get started for free or use code ANYTHING50 to save 50% on starter and standard plans for the first 3 months of your annual subscription at brevo.com/anything. Cozy Earth makes everyday comfort feel like a real upgrade. From unbelievably soft sleepwear to plush blankets, go to cozyearth.com and use the code Kwame for up to 20% off, and you'll get a post-purchase survey. Make sure you mention you heard about it here. Incogni helps you to take your personal data back by removing it from places online where it shouldn't be, helping to reduce your exposure to scams and identity theft. Use code ANYTHING for 60% off of an annual plan at incogni.com/anything. As always, you can find all of these deals in the show notes. Your sex life won't get better by luck. It will only get better by having the conversation that you keep avoiding. If you keep on treating sex like it's something that should just happen, here's what you're actually going to get: more awkwardness, more insecurity, less connection, and a relationship where resentment quietly replaces desire. My guest today is Dr. Nicole McNichols. She's a University of Washington professor who teaches the most popular human sexuality course in the United States and is the author of the incredible book, You Could Be Having Better Sex. And she's going to name the myth that silently kills long-term passion and how to replace it with a simple, repeatable practice. Let's jump in. Let's talk about the conversations around sex and maybe just even acknowledging why it's so hard to have these conversations on the topic.
Well, that's something that I really realized when I first started teaching my course is how much discomfort and stigma there is surrounding sexuality as a topic. And we all are just used to messages that tell us that you get lucky or that sex is a treat. And it tends to go into the same bucket that we use to categorize pleasure overall. We, live in this puritanical culture where we all work ourselves to death and view productivity as a mark of our self-worth. And what we don't understand is the reams of research that just really show how critical pleasure is to our mental well-being. But also, it affects us at a cognitive level, allowing us to think more creatively, be better problem solvers, build something called ego resilience that within itself allows us to handle life's inevitable challenges. So pleasure is critical, and allowing people to be educated about that and understand that this is something that needs to be prioritized in their life is so important. And then when we get into sex, people are so used to thinking of it as something that's not important or that should just be sidelined, or one of the biggest myths I talk about, that it should just sort of suddenly happen, right? Which is one of the myths that couples in long-term relationships, I think, struggle with the most. But it's really something where there's so much evidence showing that good sexual experiences, healthy, positive, enjoyable, pleasurable sexual experiences are a huge predictor of our well-being, of our physical health, longevity, immunity. It protects against cardiovascular disease. It protects against Alzheimer's. New research coming out showing its protective abilities for degenerative brain diseases. And it's good for our relationships, right? It's good for sexual satisfaction. Over multiple studies shows a strong longitudinal effect where it leads to higher relationship satisfaction. And so allowing couples to overcome the shame, the stigma, the discomfort, or understanding that no matter what, these conversations are going to be awkward, but they're important to have anyway, is really something I'm passionate about and that I'm trying to bring to the world.
Incredible. I mean, I've learned so much in the last few minutes. This is incredible because this is already very paradigm shifting. And I think it really comes down to a lot of different things, but a couple of them are just the societal impact, cultural impact on how we have been programmed to think about sex, the activity in general. And you're right. This really ties to our perspective on pleasure as a whole,
Yes.
and how we see the like work before play type of thing, see, trivializing the enjoyable aspects of life. But now, like you said, in psychology, we're recognizing how fundamentally important pleasure and enjoyment are when it comes to just living a good
Exactly.
life. This is really interesting. So it sounds like on a fundamental level, even before we start to have these conversations about sex, we need to look inside of ourselves to understand how we personally think about the topic and why.
Exactly. And really identify what are the individual factors that are getting in our own personal way from being able to discuss it, right? Is it purity culture in which we grew up with? Is it religion? Is it our parents? Is it the community we grew up in? Is it school? Or maybe you grew up in a very sex positive environment where even these conversations could happen, but we're just inundated with messages from Netflix or from pornography about what sex should and ought to look like that create these standards that, if not shame, at least are introducing massive quantities of insecurity because of the very natural human tendency to compare yourself against these standards that are just inevitably, subconsciously, unconsciously being set by the media.
Yes. And I think it's impossible to have this conversation without talking about, like we already talked about society and culture, but then also religion and the media. And I want to, of course, tactfully, but
Yes.
responsibly discuss religion when it comes to this, because it's going to be, I mean, for a lot of people, our early messages came from religion. So what impact does religion, and there are very many of them, but religion in general, what impact does that have on people's perspectives on this topic?
Well, I feel like I can speak on this from a personal level. So I'm half Jewish and half Catholic. My mom is Catholic, my dad is Jewish. And just seeing how conversations from both of them differed so much during my childhood growing up is really quite interesting. So my mom was very nervous to talk about sex. She, didn't really feel comfortable talking about body parts or about, the act of sex, certainly. But to her credit, she had grown up in a very Catholic family where you did not even say the word. So she wanted to protect me against the vulnerability that comes from having virtually no information. So I do remember her at least sitting me down and giving me a talk about puberty and your body and what happens. And I still remember that. And it happened when I was quite young, 6 or 7, which is absolutely the right age when conversations like that should happen. But I could just tell, even at the time, I remember thinking how uncomfortable she felt. And even now, she's, of course, so, so proud of me, but still kind of can't believe that conversations about sex like this are happening and at such an open level. With my dad, it was a little bit different. It's interesting because, of course, there's a lot of guilt and shame that's inherent to all religions when it comes to sex, or almost all religions. But Judaism is a little bit different in that there is a appreciation of value of at least the importance of sex in the context of marriage, sort of this idea of the beauty of marital sex, and even in some of in parts of the Torah, there are things that are written about how it's female pleasure too that's quite important and that should be prioritized. Um, so my dad just had much more of sort of an open idea around conversations around sexuality. I don't ever remember talking about sex specifically with my dad one on one, but it was just a flavor in the air of within the family. It was not a big deal to talk about sex, or that it was okay to introduce humor in ways that sort of did a little bit of a wink wink to the importance of sex. So it was interesting because I grew up with that. And I certainly had the same kind of sex education that most people, in the 1990s had in high school, which was here's how to put a condom on a cucumber. Good luck. um, but I did find that when I started teaching my class, I was much less nervous talking about these topics than most people were. And I think it was understanding that because I felt so much more comfortable that I really could help people, especially when it came to creating more of a sense of connection within them and fighting this sense of fear that they had about sex, because it was a topic that I think a little bit because of my religious upbringing, I felt maybe perhaps a tad more comfortable speaking about than most.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, you answered that perfectly. I know it
Okay.
can be tricky blending the conversation on sex
Yes.
and religion. And for me, I my family originally is from the Caribbean. I'm a first generation Caribbean American.
Oh,
And then I grew up in Tiffin, Ohio, small town Ohio, but went to Catholic schools, but was raised in a Baptist church. So there was a lot of religion coming at me. And so yeah.
yeah.
And so
Wow.
I don't I don't specifically recall my parents having like the talk with me. I know that we had like health class, which, was woefully inadequate, but I think the main purpose of those health class sex talks was to scare the hell out of you, to make
Yes.
sure you didn't do anything. It was just like picture after picture of diseased genitalia to make sure you weren't interested in such activities. Looking back on it, I'm like, man, that was what a time to be alive, right? And
Exactly.
I'm trying to have my son is 10, and my oldest is 10, youngest is 4. It's probably beyond his depth at this point. But I did have the talk with Kai at a few months ago, and it went pretty well. He's very curious. I think the line, my favorite, the line that I'm most proud of in that conversation was because I was using a board. Now, obviously,
Uh-huh.
this isn't drawn to scale. And I was like, at that point, I feel like I'd lost the plot. Like, I was I was trying my
I
best.
love that there was at least a disclaimer.
Yes.
I might borrow that for my lectures.
Please do. Please do. But I think this kind of speaks to the awkwardness of it, though. And you've mentioned this before, and I think it's important to acknowledge that awkwardness from time to time. Can you talk to us about the awkwardness that surrounds these conversations and the impact it has during the conversations?
Yes. Well, I think that I see it, for example, in my large classes where I have a lot of younger students who are, freshmen, 18, 19, away from home for the first time and finally in a place where they're able to think about a topic, sex, without sort of the overlooking eyes of their parents or their communities. So college is naturally a time when we see people start to consider ideas that maybe are different than that which they grew up with. But nonetheless, there is a lot of awkwardness and a lot of discomfort. And so part of what I try to do is normalize their experiences and talk about how, excuse me, something like insecurity over the size of your genitals or insecurity over how long a sexual experience for you lasts or insecurity about what your body looks like or whether you're good in bed or good at sex is so common. And I can create a sense of normalcy when students see through, I can do these online polls where students see just how many other students in the class share their exact same insecurities. And I also have an online mechanism where they can submit anonymous questions and they get to see what each other's questions are, what the things are that they want to know more about. And what's interesting is that a lot of these questions will often come in the forms of jokes. And it's clear, though, the jokes are interesting because I've gotten comments like, oh, how do you deal with people who are clearly just, asking a question just to, get a rise out of the class? And of course, nothing phases me, no matter what it is. I've seen it at this point. But the jokes, always underneath them have some kind of authentic source of inquiry. There's always a real question underneath them. And so that's why I love being to I can acknowledge the humor or the cleverness of the joke and then dive into what the research says about the underlying topic, because there almost always is a really interesting answer that's at least somewhat related to the question that they're asking. So I really feel like normalizing the awkwardness, making everyone realize we're kind of in all this together. It's hard to talk about, but let's find connection in the fact that we all want to talk about it. We're acknowledging it's important and we want to show a sense of compassion for each other. And this is an open space where you can ask anything you want. You can be on, as long as it's coming from some type of honest question, I'm happy to answer it. But I think it's, really about empowering people with a sense of understanding about their bodies and their emotional selves when it comes to sex. I talk about this in my book in the McNichols hierarchy of sexual needs, where I essentially try to provide a roadmap for people that says, look, we have to, if we're going to be having conversations about sex and empower ourselves, understand that sex is a physical, cognitive, social, emotional, spiritual, creative form of self-expression. And that if we can look at all of our needs and all of the data that exists within those different types of sexual needs, we can try to build an integrated sexual self that allows us to make sexual choices from a place of empowerment, knowledge, autonomy, as opposed to what culture and society or our parents have told us. So that's really my goal, is really affording people all this information to compensate for the fact that there is no federally mandated sex education. And most people grew up in states where there was no sex education offered. So I try to be the stopgap for that so that people can have information I think they deserve and that makes a meaningful impact in their life.
Oh, this is fantastic. And I will tell you, in this moment in my life, this is the least interested I've ever been in Maslow, because now we need to talk about your hierarchy. Okay. Okay. You're not you're not just gonna drop I have a hierarchy and not tell me about your
Right,
let's walk through
absolutely.
this.
Well, my hierarchy starts, it has essentially three categories of layers. And it starts with your physical needs as well as your cognitive needs, meaning that I want to teach people about their bodies, about their anatomy, about the different types of erotic touch, of which there is a lot of research on, that leads to the most amount of pleasure for different people, and give people tools for experimenting with the types of pleasure and touch that will work best for them. But then on top of that, we dive into a cognitive level where we have to understand that to have an incredible sexual experience, you need to know your body, you need to know your erogenous zones, you need to know what turns you on. But we have to also clear what I like to call your mental erotic space, meaning there is just so much data coming out now on how much things like stress, exhaustion, overload, body image issues really can put the brakes on our pleasure cycle. And understanding that pleasure isn't just something that happens right when you're making contact with your partner, but that there's a whole fascinating neurological sequence of events that make up the pleasure cycle that if we unpack and understand, we can leverage to create more pleasurable sexual experiences. And so I argue that then, after on top of that, we can talk about our social and emotional needs. In other words, once we feel empowered with our bodies, we've carved out our own mental erotic space. We can begin to look at what sexual connection looks like with an actual partner and think about what are the types of sexual experiences that I'm interested in, regardless of what I've been told I should want. And so maybe that looks like, how do I reignite a flame in the bedroom with a partner I've been married to for 20 years? But maybe that also looks at data showing that, look, there are a lot of people who choose to remain single or are in between relationships or are not looking to get married now that the average age of marriage, or are not yet married. And, we know that the average age of marriage is now 31. So people are spending a lot more time single. How do you have sexual experiences that might be in the form of casual sex or friends with benefits that can, I argue in my book, be connected if we have the right ingredients? And then we get into that top layer of expressive needs and creative needs, where fueled by curiosity, we can understand all of the different dynamics that sexual fantasy and even things like kink or even ethical porn can introduce to help us to continue evolving when we develop our sense of what it is that we're into, what we're after, what types of sexual experiences really make us feel fulfilled. So, my goal with this hierarchy is to give people, again, a roadmap building from literally the bottom up, where they feel like they know what they want and they feel like they know how to get there. Because knowing that sex and pleasure is important is a critical first step, but having a roadmap for how to build that sex life that you want is also absolutely essential.
This is so profound. And I think
Oh, thank you.
that a lot of folks, as they listen to this, they are going to, their minds are going to be blown, because it's a topic that has not really been meaningfully explored in the majority of people's lives, right?
Right.
With a deep level of sophistication. And I think because of like shame, guilt, all of these things that we've discussed, but then also I'm glad to see that there's more literature building up, but I think it could be hard to find when your mind might be flooded with things like the media and porn being informing you of what it's supposed to be like. You know?
Exactly. And, it's funny that you say that. I mean, that is exactly right. I come from this armed with data. And I get really excited reading journal articles about sex research. And there are top tier, really rigorous peer reviewed studies out there that give us real answers based off of thousands and thousands and thousands of participants that can help people. And so, as I joke with my publisher, I originally, came to the table thinking maybe I want to write a book called like Sex Research Greatest Hits. And I think I'd probably be the only person to want to buy a book with that title. But essentially, I've tried to take the most cutting edge, compelling research based off of my diving into these articles, going to conferences, talking with the absolute top researchers in the field, and being able to take that information, that data, and explain to people this is how we can use this research to improve our lives, not according to somebody's opinion, not according to religion, media, culture, your parents, but according to what the actual research shows us so that we can make empowered, informed decisions.
Are you ready to take your business marketing to the next level? Meet Brevo, the all-in-one CRM platform to help you connect with customers, boost engagement, and grow your business smarter. With Brevo, you can manage all of your customer interactions in one place, nurture leads with their built-in CRM, reach your audience through email and SMS, and keep them coming back with powerful automations. But here's where it gets really exciting. Meet Aura, Brevo's AI assistant. Aura helps you to craft smarter campaigns by suggesting personalized content, optimizing send times, and even analyzing performance data to help you improve your strategy in real time. It's like having a marketing expert on your team 24/7. And of course, Brevo offers advanced analytics, seamless integrations, and AI-driven personalization. Everything that you need to create multi-channel campaigns that hit the mark every time. And of course, Brevo offers advanced analytics. Get started for free today. Use code ANYTHING50 to save 50% on starter and standard plans for the first 3 months of an annual subscription. Just head to www.brevo.com/anything and take your marketing further with Brevo and Aura. All right, let's talk about something that's actually a negotiation skill. Taking care of yourself before you show up to negotiate with anybody else. Because if you're tired, stressed, and running on fumes, you're going to make worse decisions. Period. And that's why I'm a huge fan of Cozy Earth. Cozy Earth's whole mission is to elevate the everyday with obsessive detail and better materials so you can feel it immediately. Their bamboo pajama set that's made from viscose from bamboo is unbelievably soft. It drapes really nicely, and the classic cuddle blanket, that thing is dangerous because once you wrap up in it, you're not getting anything done. It's plush, it has a comforting weight, and makes your home feel like a reset button. And here's the best part. It is completely risk-free. Cozy Earth gives you a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty, so they really stand behind the quality. So this month, show a little extra love to someone you care about or yourself. Go to cozyearth.com and use my code Kwame for up to 20% off. And if you get a post-purchase survey, make sure to let them know that you heard about Cozy Earth right here. Beautiful. This is incredible. And let's talk about the mechanics of these actual conversations. Everybody is like,
Yes.
mechanics? What?
I was like, oh, let's get into it.
Of the conversation.
I have tips.
And so let's say maybe
Chapter 3.
everybody is running to Amazon right now. They're like, chapter 3, I need this. Oh, this is great. So for those people who say, okay, now I recognize that with my partner, I need to have some deeper conversations.
Yes.
What would you say if you want to establish connection, you want to have a healthy sex life with your partner? What are the types of conversations we need to be having? And then we can get into how to have them.
The best kinds of conversations, just like the best sex, come from a source of curiosity. And so I always recommend a series of question asking, mutual question asking, where you start with questions that are like, what's the best sex we've ever had? Or what's something that you've always wanted to try in bed, but have been too nervous to ask? Or what's something that I already do that you want more of? And usually by having these conversations where, first of all, again, back to the research, Aaron and Aaron showed that there is a very real effect when we ask partners increasingly vulnerable personal questions about their thoughts, inner feelings, emotions, that it creates a sense of intimacy and connection that's very, very strong. And so to leverage that power of intimate, vulnerable question asking is really the path toward better, more connected sex with a partner. And I think that it is helpful sometimes. You can ask a partner a question like, what's the best sex we've ever had? Or what's something that you want more of that you want to try? Or what's a fantasy that you have? And we can feel, well, gosh, I'm not even quite sure I know the answer to that before I go and share it. And so it's important to be able to raise questions like that. And maybe even both partners take 5 minutes to just stream of consciousness, write down what comes to mind in response to that question, knowing that this is not something that needs to be polished and edited and put into a PowerPoint presentation, but is simply thoughts that are coming out that you're sharing that are just a launching pad for the direction that maybe you want your sex life to go.
Amazing. This is great. And how do we broach this topic? So like now getting into the mechanics of the conversation too,
Yes.
because I'm
Yes.
thinking once Whitney comes home, I'm like, Whitney, I have some questions for you.
Yeah.
And then you launch right into it. It's like, can I put down my bags? What the hell? Uh,
Exactly.
so for the folks who are saying, man, okay, I'm getting that I need to
Like
ask these questions. How do I start the conversation and break through that awkwardness?
Exactly. Well, I often break sexual communication in general into sort of two categories, right? There needs to be sexual communication, of course, that's happening during the act itself. So giving feedback, asking for what you want, initiating what you want, giving feedback, asking for things visually, behaviorally, verbally, non-verbally. And so that really applies when small micro adjustments are being made to whatever you're initiating and enjoying while in the bedroom together. Larger conversations about checking in about your sex life, wanting to level up your pleasure, so to speak, wanting to really take your sex life to the next level. Those conversations tend to go best when you are in a very unsexy environment. They tend to go better when you have your clothes on, when you're not feeling vulnerable, when you're not about to start having sex, or when it's just ended. Because if we are in a situation where we're about to become intimate and someone says, honey, I really want to tie you up tonight and try spanking, maybe your partner will say, that
Yeah.
sounds amazing. But they also might be there half naked into the act and completely get frightened by that, right? And completely think, oh my gosh, where's that coming from? And it's natural when somebody broaches a really big thing sexually or anything in your life, really, that you have questions, right? Why is it that you want to do that? Because the thing that's fascinating about sex is that so often the things that we hear from our partners in terms of what they want to try or things they want to do, or even just sex acts in general, a lot of times the discomfort comes not necessarily from the act itself, but from the cognitive meaning being assigned to it. In other words, if your partner is suddenly halfway through sex saying, "Can I tie you to the bed?" It's natural to think, why do they want to tie me to the bed? What does that mean? What does that mean about our relationship? What does that mean about the sex we're already having? Are they not satisfied? But if that kind of conversation is had outside, let's say at a diner over brunch with your clothes on Sunday morning, then your partner has a chance to process it, right? They have a chance to think, why is it that you are turned on by that? And you have a chance to explain to them why it is that it seems appealing, right? So, for example, the question might be, the insecurity might be, does this mean that you aren't already happy in our sex life? Isn't the sex we're having great? To which the partner, you could respond, I love the sex that we're having. It's amazing. It's really intimate. But I read in Nicole's book that we're supposed to introduce some type of novelty or micro novelty, which we can get into, um, to, keep things interesting. And it's, erotic power play is something that, whether you realize it or not, is at the heart of really every sexual experience, even if it's just manifesting as somebody leading and somebody following. And so, let's say you aren't completely ready to be tied to the bed, but maybe you can take a baby step and try a blindfold, right? Or maybe there's some other type of, maybe a, a feather or something that feels like it's on the way towards that continuum, really, of erotic power play. That might feel like a really good negotiation, since we're on your podcast. that could that could happen. That could really help both people feel like their needs are getting met. So again, to have these tricky conversations where you're asking for something that's really large and different from the sex you're already having, you just need to afford patience and understanding and compassion to each other, so you can get at the heart of what are the insecurities that this request might be bringing up, and what are ways that jointly we can together as a team move through them to find something that turns us both on.
There is so much to explore here. And I think one of the things I want to explore first, I have to be patient and sequence these questions appropriately. So when we're having these conversations and we are expressing our needs, the partner, like you said, might be kind of surprised, like, whoa, I did not know this was in you, in terms of like this is something that you wanted. It's very different from what we've done before, and maybe even very different from the way that I carry myself in general. And so
Yes.
it's often that the person feels almost afraid, or it's almost like an indictment of their performance, the desire that manifests itself in the other partner. And so you suggested that when somebody asks, or mentioned it happens when somebody makes a request, you might just say, okay, well, why is it that you want that? How do we have that portion of the conversation without that question seeming judgmental? Where it's like, well, why do you, what happened in your life that makes you desire such a thing? And then the person's like, you know what? Just kidding. I don't want
Yeah.
that. Right. So
Yeah.
how do we make
Yeah.
sure that it doesn't get judgmental?
Well, I think it comes from understanding within yourself that your request is not something that needs to be pathologized. And so, again, I go back to the research. There is this idea, if we're going to this example again of asking for something that might fall under this umbrella of BDSM or being tied to a bed, that people who are kinky or are engaging in any kind of BDSM or the dominatrix, so to speak, that they must have had some kind of trauma early on in their life. And that belief is so pervasive that there's actually been a lot of research on this to look at people who do practice kink and who are part of kinky communities to find out more about what their childhoods were like and what their psychological makeup is like. And what's been found is that people in these kinky communities who are really engaged with these types of unique sexual behaviors are just as healthy as everyone else. It does not, in other words, come from a source of sexual trauma or of being abused as a child the way so many people assume. The reason for that is because the place where we travel to when we're in a sexual experience with another person is profoundly different than the one that we carry out day to day in our lives. And our fantasies and what we want in the bedroom, it's very normal for that to be incredibly politically incorrect. And that's okay, because fantasy does not map onto, sometimes it does, but it does not always map onto exactly what we want to do. And so even if you, in other words, want to be dominated in the bedroom, it might be that that's actually just a response to feeling like you have so many responsibilities in the rest of your life that you just want to be able to surrender. Again, this goes back to a continuum. Sometimes it's really nice to, I enjoy letting my husband just pick the restaurant or the movie, right? Sometimes I just feel like I have 1,200 students to manage and I've had to make so many decisions. It's nice just to let someone else decide. That's kinky.
Hmm.
That is on this continuum, right? It's this idea that we want to surrender control. And so this is the reason that, again, research has found that a lot of people who enjoy being dominated, being tied up, being, in that, sub role, so to speak, are actually people who are quite often politicians, celebrities, high powered CEOs. I mean, many dominatrixes report that those are their most frequent clients. And again, it's not because they're looking to repeat a traumatic childhood experience. It's because they're looking to enter an erotic space that's totally different from their day-to-day life, where they can experience emotions that counteract maybe those that are disturbing and stressful in the rest of their lives. So I think that if you have a sense coming to your partner that what you're asking for is healthy and that it is a form of play, that it is a form of going to a fantasy land that you only travel to with your partner, where you can be a person that you're not allowed to be in the rest of your life, and that you can act out something that's adventurous and different and be a person with your partner that no one else gets to see, it might start to sound a lot less threatening to them than if you have absolutely, no idea, or if you feel like it's just something that you buy into the myth that it was coming from a place of sexual trauma. But I think that if you understand that it's coming from a healthy place, that all these desires, all these forms of sexual expression are just part of what make us all beautifully human and is what makes up the gorgeous diversity of sexual expression, that we can celebrate these differences and understand that, okay, it may sound a little bit crazy, but let's have a growth mindset here and give it a try and see how it goes. And know it may be like that first pancake that you try and it comes out terrible, but that's okay. You can just keep trying and have a sense of humor and laugh about it and know that, no, of course, it doesn't represent some severe underlying psychological trauma.
That's really, really powerful. Yeah, and I love again how we're always circling back to destigmatizing these conversations, because it can be really scary, really, really scary.
So we have like to approach the conversation from a place of nothing's right, nothing's wrong, right?
Yes, there are some clear set boundaries and rules, though, which obviously comes down to consent. So it's not okay to, you need to be having open conversations, but there's also a process you need to go through if the partner says, I'm simply not down for that, right? There can't be pressuring and nagging and I mean, there needs to be a conversation where you really think to yourself, okay, if I've really explained where this desire is coming from and why I want it, and my partner is really, really still opposed, you have to kind of think to yourself, is this something that I think would be fun to try, but I'm not going to, be resentful or unsatisfied if I don't have it? Or is this a sexual need that I absolutely need to be happy? Right. And that's something that only you as a person can decide. And at that point, you need to make a decision about, can I just let this go?
Yeah.
Or do I need to, rethink either, unfortunately, my relationship
Yeah.
or, right, there are all these creative different relationship structures where people often use some form of ethical non-monogamy where they can have a sexual partner, whether it means going to see an actual dominatrix or having an outside relationship that's totally transparent, whole nother topic of conversation. But essentially, if you are so interested in something sexual that it is really a part you feel of who you are, which it very well might be. And I want to empower people to understand that sometimes that just really might be something they really need to be happy. And your partner is just really resistant. You can't, if you continue to push, if you continue to nag, it's just going to destroy your relationship and it's not fair to your partner. So you really need to respect that boundary. And then, of course, we get into, this gets tricky too, because yes, no type of act, deserves the type of bias that we have. But people can get very upset with that even because, for example, there is a popular kink practice that is called consensual non-consent that, believe it or not, has become increasingly popular. And it is what it sounds like. It's the idea that you write a scene where you're going to pretend that one person is having sex against their will. But it's different than sexual assault because everything has been negotiated and talked about up front, and it's a scene and you're following and there's safe words and it can stop at any time. And, it's interesting. Something like that, again, our tendency might be, whoa, that clearly is somebody who is just self-destructive and that represents a manifestation of some prior trauma. But actually, there's research now showing that those experiences, if it is something that came from trauma, can be quite healing because you're reliving the experience, but in a way where you're leading it to a very different ending that you have 100% control over. So, it's, but at the same time, because we don't get any sex education about sex, kink, pleasure, anything really beyond don't get an STI or get pregnant, all the horrible things that can happen to you. We don't really tell people how to communicate. And so you can end up with some of these more risky behaviors in a situation where maybe consent isn't totally present, and that is unethical. So respecting, communicating, and destigmatizing is absolutely essential, but so is respecting the humanity of your partner and their their entitlement to having boundaries and certain things that they're all for and certain things that they just really never do want to try.
But the reason of the boundary can be different, right? For instance, let's say I don't like to do something. I can say I don't like it because that's wrong, or I don't like it just because I feel uncomfortable with that.
So I think that, fundamentally, look, somebody's own sense of ethics is not something that I feel like I have the right to try to challenge. And if you inherently really believe that a certain sex act is wrong, that's your right to feel that way. In a conversation, I might encourage you to look at those feelings and examine why it is that you think it's wrong. But if you truly feel that in your soul, you need to honor that, right? And that's about creating that sense of safety that is fundamental to any pleasurable experience. Because if you're doing something that you truly believe is wrong, you're not going to be able to enjoy it. Right. And that's not an autonomous, pleasurable, connected sexual experience. That's the antithesis, if anything, of what I'm trying to advocate for.
Yep. It sounds like the true guiding light and ethical line is consent.
Yes.
Where it's like, okay, hey, well, the scene that you just described would be a crime otherwise. But
Right.
then when you add consent, then it is something that could be mutually pleasurable and beneficial, which segues perfectly into the topic of consent, because this is it can be murky. And I mean, like, where do we start with that?
Exactly. So that's a topic I'm really, excited to talk about. So in my book, I do present a new framework for thinking about consent. I call it the McNichols Consent Manifesto. And it is acknowledging that, yes, we've come a far way in talking about the importance of consent, but we really need to elevate these conversations because so far they've really been primarily zeroed in on the articulation and protection and respect of our physical boundaries. But we need to take that a step further in honoring the emotional and social boundaries of ourselves as well. And what I mean by that is consent needs to be built, of course, on a foundation of communication about what's happening before, during, and after the experience, right? You need to be asking permission, giving feedback, not just before the experience, but throughout the entire thing. And we need to also acknowledge that feedback needs to come in the form of verbal and nonverbal communication. In other words, the fight or flight response is very real. If you're with a sexual partner and they're not making any kind of movement, don't just assume that that means they're okay with everything, right? Sometimes when people are really scared or are not into an experience, their response is to freeze. So if your partner is responding in a way that's anything less than enthusiastically in favor of what's happening in the moment throughout the whole experience, everything needs to stop. So that is critical. But beyond that, we need to start respecting emotional and social boundaries as well. And what I mean by that is approaching our sexual experiences with both a sense of emotional honesty as well as situational transparency. And so if you look at a situation, for example, where let's say it's sex with a new partner and you are, both enthusiastic about the experience, but to one person, it really is representing a night of fun and unattached sex, which within itself can be fine. But if the other person has been picking up cues that you've been giving, that this is actually something more meaningful and a launching point to a longer term relationship, then I would argue that real consent is not actually present, because in order to be given, consent needs to be fully informed. And if people are approaching a sexual experience with entirely different goals, and if one person has been purposely, essentially leading the other person on to think the experience means more than it does, that's not ethical, right? And in my mind, that's not consent. Now, do we drag somebody off to jail for that? No, of course not. But I do believe that there are these gray zones where, again, I mean, this comes back to our conversation about how much stigma and shame there is about sex because we can't communicate. We have a hard time having conversations, not just about the acts themselves, but about what their meaning is. And I talk about, I think we need to pay attention to things like situational transparency, right? The example I give to my students, and this has happened to more than one person I know, is imagine you have your absolute dream job after college and you're in some incredible city and you're at the hotel bar after a night of, a great fascinating day of work, and you meet this really attractive stranger and you're totally vibing with this stranger and they're amazing and you're super attracted to them. And then things heat up and you end up in going back to one of your hotel rooms and have this incredible sexual experience, multiple orgasms all around, right? So then the next morning you wake up and you think, well, that was amazing. Maybe we can sometime, if we're in the same city again, meet up. And you find out from this person that they say to you, well, actually it can't happen again because I'm married. This has happened before, right? Now, in that experience, consent looked like it was present throughout the entire event. Everybody is agreeing to what's happening, but you didn't have the information that that person was married. You didn't have full transparency into their situation until after the event. What you would do with that information, that I'm not judging, right? Maybe you would have had that information and had, a great night of sex with them anyway. But maybe, to Simone's point, you'd feel like that's wrong. I'm not having sex with a married person. That's really crossing a boundary. And I'm going to feel horrible about myself if I do that, right? That person has essentially, tricked you into having a sexual experience by not being honest about that in that case. And same with, I think we need to be paying attention to power differentials. This is something I see, especially on college campuses, but especially when we start talking about race and socioeconomic status. Certain people are just going to be coming into a new sexual experience with different levels of power that they just are born into or have or bring to the experience. And we need to be sensitive to those inherent power differentials so that the person with more power isn't maybe unintentionally pressuring the person with less power into a sexual experience that they're not quite sure they want to have. So I just think we need to have a more holistic view. It's really that what I'm advocating for is just thinking about not just I want to protect my sexual partners as their bodies and their physical boundaries, but I want to respect them as human beings as well.
That's powerful because I think the conversations about consent have been limited, and maybe this is just my bias as a lawyer, to criminality. Was this legal or not? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's right or okay, right? Those two things, they're very different. And I remember one of the guests we had on a few years back, Vanessa Bonds, she talked about the distinction between compliance and consent, because somebody could comply and it could be completely legal. And the person says, yes, I want to do this. But did they truly give wholehearted consent? Those two things are different, because if you're complying, you still feel somewhat compelled, but it becomes very murky for the person who is on the other side of that compliance, because they say, yes, the person clearly said yes, but then that goes to the power differentials and the different societal, cultural things that might have been impacting that interaction too.
Exactly. And I think we saw many instances of that come to light through the Me Too movement, where it was really clear that there were people who were in positions of power who, held the keys to the kingdom, and where people who worked for those people, yes, maybe in the moment they looked like they were complying with having sex with their boss or with whoever it was that would be able to, cast them on their show or in their movie. But was there really consent, or were they going along with what they felt like they were being emotionally manipulated into doing?
Here's a quick warning for everyone listening. Scams and identity theft usually don't start with some genius hacker. Most of the time, it's just because your personal data is so easy to find online. I'm talking about people search sites, shady directories, and places where anyone can pull up your address, phone number, and even your relatives' info. And then they use that leverage to impersonate you or target your family, and that's how these scams usually work. That's why I've been using Incogni. Instead of you spending hundreds of hours manually trying to opt out of these sites yourself, Incogni just automates the whole thing. They act as your proxy, taking down your data and demanding its removal from databases you've probably never heard of. And the thing is, this isn't just a one-time fix. Data has a way of popping back up, so Incogni continuously monitors these sites in the background to make sure your information stays deleted. I personally recommend the Family Unlimited plan. It's the best way for you to cover your entire household. It includes custom removals, so if you ever find a specific page exposing your family's info, you just send Incogni the link and their privacy experts handle the manual takedown for you. You can get your data back risk-free with Incogni's 30-day money-back guarantee. And if you use the code ANYTHING at incogni.com/ anything, you'll get 60% off an annual plan. Again, that's incogni.com/anything. Code anything. Starting something new isn't just hard, it's terrifying. Before you launch, the doubt starts stacking up. What if I fail? What if no one listens? What if no one buys? And even if you push through, you still need a system that makes the business side feel less chaotic. And that's where Shopify comes in. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses all around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. It helps you to build beautiful online stores with ready-to-use templates, and it's packed with AI tools that can write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance product photography. And if you get stuck, Shopify's award-winning 24/7 customer support is there with answers. It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/Kwame. Go to shopify.com/Kwame. That's shopify.com/Kwame.
So
It's challenging. It's tricky.
yeah.
And then also, I think this is especially relevant to the students that you're talking to because they are young and full of hormones, right? They will
Yes.
say, well, I mean, this conversation seems like a buzzkill, So I want you to talk to the buzzkill people, and walk them through
I
how
love
to
the
handle
buzzkill people.
it.
Here's what I would tell the buzzkill people is that the same things that lead to consent, as we're defining it with this more modern definition, are the exact same skills that lead to better sex. So if you want to have incredible sexual experiences, you're not just thinking about consent in terms of how do I make sure that I'm not going to go to jail or that I'm crossing an ethical boundary. But if you look at the very skills we're talking about, giving feedback, right? Asking for what you want, saying, can I get a condom? Say, how can I tell if you're enjoying yourself? Can I touch you here? Does this feel good? What do you want more of? Tell me how to tell, I can keep going. All of these different types of methods of communication, checking in, those are what makes sex better, right? One of the biggest myths is that we're just simply put on this planet and we're either good at sex or we're not. But what's abundantly clear is that being good at sex is a skill set, one that you can improve with practice. And the practice is reliant on the exact same skills that are implicit to any type of consensual sexual experience. And the other thing is that I think we have to consider, and I think this is very true, especially for women who historically have been so shamed when it comes to their sexuality, right? Women are supposed to not pursue sex, not want sex, not be desirous. We're taught that sex is really only appropriate in a long-term relationship. We're slut shamed if we have it outside of that context. But being able to say no to the sexual experiences that you don't want to have is directly linked to being able to say yes to the sexual experiences that you do want to have. They rely on the same skill set, empowerment, knowledge, and autonomy.
Yes. No, this is great. And I also want to disclaim a bit of a bias here because I recognize that as I've been going through this conversation, I've been approaching it and asking questions from a very heteronormative kind of perspective. So I think it would be good to talk about this from the perspective of other people's experiences as well. So folks that are within the LGBTQ community, we have genders, the different gender dynamics, different genders in general. So as we add that layer to this conversation, what changes, what stays the same, what is necessarily more complex, and what is often overcomplicated?
Well, we have a lot to learn from those in the LGBTQ community because the benefit that they have is that they have not come to sexual experiences with this heteronormative framework that pushes this idea that sex has a beginning, middle, and end that is solely focused on penetration. That penetration is going to be the best kind of sex for everyone involved when we can say we know for sure from multiple studies that only 18% of women can actually have an orgasm from penetrative sex alone. The rest need some kind of clitoral stimulation. People who are coming to experiences who are queer don't don't look at this thinking, oh, well, obviously we're just going to have penetrative sex and that's the sex. They're used to asking each other, what are you into? Right? That phrase, what are you into? What do you like to do? What feels good? What do you want to do? Is something that's just very normalized among many in the LGBTQ community. And so being able to come to a sexual experience where you're rejecting this notion that this heteronormative sexual script of penis and vagina sex is all that it's about is really freeing and is really going to lead to more pleasure for everyone involved because you're coming from this perspective of pleasure diversity and not assuming that everyone's having orgasms from the same type of sex that we see over and over and over again in the movies. So I think that, for people who are gender diverse, there can be certain, of course, if there is a sense of body dysphoria, that can absolutely lead to, feelings of insecurity or feelings of not feeling completely at home in your own body. And of course, that's going to translate into your sexual experiences. And I think that it's just so important to have compassion for that, especially, self-compassion, and understand that's something you're working through and be able to communicate with, with your partner about that, hopefully with a counselor if you have access to that, if it's something that really bothers you. But with, in general, people who are in the queer community, first of all, lesbians, if we look at heterosexual sex, there's something called the orgasm gap. The orgasm gap explains a phenomenon that when you ask heterosexual people, did you have an orgasm the last time you had sex? 95% of men will say yes, and only 63% of women will say yes. But which is very, very sad. Why is this? Again,
Yes.
overemphasis on penetrative sex. But if we ask lesbians, it's about 86% that say that they had an orgasm the last time. So lesbians are clearly communicating and focusing on types of sexual behaviors that are much more pleasurable for women than how we traditionally think about a heterosexual straight sexual experience. So I just think that it's nice because they don't have to rely on those scripts that can be so imprisoning for the rest of us.
That's great, and my hope is that after this episode, the orgasm gap of the listeners of this podcast has shrunk significantly. We're trying to do that clarify here, and I want to talk about pressure here too, pressure and performance, because I think there's, especially again, we hold on a second. Yes, my son, who's 10.
Oh.
How's it going?
Hi.
Okay.
He's like, he heard sex.
Yeah, I know, right? You all stay up there. Bye. Close the door, please.
I love it. The curiosity. That's good.
Yes.
This will be the perfect segue to talk to him about what you learned.
Exactly. That was what I'll do. What listeners of the podcast should do is send this episode to your partner. I'll send it to my partner. This is how we have the conversation. That was funny. So, please leave some of this in because I think it's going to be hilarious. Okay, so back to pressure and performance. So a lot of times we can be informed by the media on what performance should look like, and that puts a lot of pressure on us too. I remember my wife and I were watching the TV show last night, and these people just got at it, and they seem to know each other intimately. But of course, it's Hollywood. They just met each other. Hey, you look good. I look good, and now they're just rolling, doing choreographed moves. Everybody's having a great time. I'm like, wait, this is not real. Yep. What is this? But then somebody who is young and impressionable looks at this and they're like, okay, so I should roll 6 times and I should do these things.
Yep.
And then if they can't do that, now they're like, maybe I'm inadequate. And then you couple that with the reality that people lie about their performance.
Oh, yes.
It's funny. I was on a flight to Amsterdam, which is a great way to start a conversation on this topic.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was wrapping a movie, and it was these young men who engaged. Their first activity was going to the red light district. They were like 18, right? So this is like their first sexual experience, and they both go. And they're so nervous they can't perform, and then they meet out in the streets afterwards. They're like, "Hey, bro, how was it?" And then they kind of sheepishly start, and then they're like, "I mean, it was fantastic. I did
Awesome.
this, I did that. You should have seen her." And they're like, "Oh yeah, me too." And both of them were
Yeah.
did not get the job done. And so, when you consider all of these messages that we are consuming, how does this impact performance?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's really coming at us from so many different angles because there are these beautifully curated scenes that we can see on Netflix or HBO Max that show these incredibly directed sex scenes, but that is not real, right? And yet our brains are designed to see experiences like that, and even if at a conscious level we know it's not real, it's activating parts of our brain that are setting that up as a standard to compare ourselves the next time we are in that situation. That's just simply how our brains learn and how they're wired to react. So to sort of fight against that, we just need to be conscious of the fact that our brains like to encode experiences that we see and set as examples, and that we need to free ourselves from comparing ourselves to what we see. I mean, the reality is that, Masters and Johnsons were these very famous sex researchers who in the 1960s were famous for bringing real people into their lab and hooking them up with a whole bunch of sensors and measuring exactly what happened in their bodies during sex. And one of the fascinating things that came out of their research was the discovery of a phenomenon known as spectatoring. So, spectatoring is kind of what it sounds like. It's this thing where instead of being mentally present during sex, which is really what's required to enjoy an experience, to have an orgasm, you need to be able to quiet the prefrontal cortex of the brain, all the thinking parts of the brain, so that the nucleus accumbens can light up. That's the pleasure center of the brain. For that to happen, you can't have judgments and comparisons and all of these different non-erotic thoughts, as Masters and Johnson term them, running through your brain. But what so often happens during spectatoring is instead of letting the sexual cues in our body and the sexual cues emanating from our partner be our guide, we instead start judging our bodies and thinking about what we look like from a third party perspective. What do my thighs look like? What does my stomach look like? Am I lasting long enough? Am I, doing this sex position that I saw last night on Netflix or on Pornhub that's, according to my rewired brain, going to make my partner have an intense orgasm, right? In other words, we get out of our natural ability to be in tune and mindful and into this prefrontal cortex where we're just constantly judging, picking apart, not coming to our sexual experiences from a place of embodiment. And that really short circuits pleasure. So understanding that, what you're not seeing in porn and what you're not seeing in Netflix is the conversation that's happening before, the conversations that are happening during, the 20 takes it took to get those perfect angles. And by the way, if you've ever listened to a, actor or actress who's described what different sex scenes are like, most of them say that they were incredibly unsexy, very awkward, not comfortable, that they were cold. So it's not, pleasure. It's easy to fake pleasure. As anyone who's ever seen, When Harry Met Sally can attest to. But it's, it's hard because at the same time, those fantasies that we see, whether it's Netflix or even porn, can be an effective way to help get turned on, get ideas about what fantasies you might have, things you might want to try. I mean, when they're appreciated as fantasy and not real, and put into that context of something that's just fun, but not representative of what real sex or real bodies look like, it's not necessarily harmful. I mean, these shows, I've loved Sex Life and Bridgerton. They're great shows. The sex in them is hot. It's just you have to understand it's not realistic. And so if you're comparing your body and the sex you're having to those scenes, you're simply going to be putting a hard stop on any kind of pleasure you can feel during your very real experiences. Because the reality is that real sex is messy. It is awkward. There are times when it feels good. There are times when it doesn't feel good. It requires communication. Not all bodies feel the same, but it's sort of that messiness that makes it also so wonderful. I mean, how boring would it be if we just fell into bed with a partner and everything was just perfectly synchronized and there was no humanity in any of the experience? It would be so boring. The fact that we have to be in this together as a team, communicating, trying, failing, laughing. I mean, that's what makes sex great. So it's just sort of reframing what an amazing sexual experience looks like.
It makes sense. It makes sense. And I think maybe one of the most responsible things the media or the porn industry could do is show more people bumping foreheads accidentally.
Yes.
Messing up.
Yes. Bloopers.
Yes.
We need a
Oh
porn
my.
bloopers.
Oh,
Wouldn't that
come
be
on.
great?
That'd be
Let's do
great.
it.
Oh
That's what we
my
need to
goodness.
do.
Well, let's
Oh,
and who's there? I guarantee there's somebody listening to this that's in the porn
I know,
industry.
right? Heard
Great,
it
yeah.
here first.
Yes, that's great. Yes. And well, let's talk about the spectator effect too, and then we can wrap, because I want to help people now that they feel fully equipped. And now let's make sure that they don't get all up in their head so they can perform at a high level. And
Yes.
so, especially, I'm wondering too if you've seen something that shows that people who are high achievers, very intellectual, who might be high in cognition, as we might say in psychology, if they can be prone to overthinking in a way that gets in the way of performance consistently. And for those folks out there who might struggle with overthinking in the moment, how do they stay more present during the sexual experience?
Yes. So that's extremely common. And it's absolutely true that the more you are used to being goal oriented in your life, the harder a time you most likely are going to have not bringing that intense focus over into your sexual experiences. And so it really takes understanding that sex is not a performance. We tend to put this verbal framing around things like achieving orgasm or finishing that does suggest, communicate this as something that has a goalpost, but it really doesn't, right? Great sex doesn't always have to include an orgasm, and there's plenty of great sex. There's plenty of sex that includes an orgasm that isn't really that great. So it's about an adventure, right? It's about chemistry, connection, play, feeling free, feeling like you are able to experiment. So, letting go of this idea that I have to cross a certain finish line to have a positive sexual experience is just completely debilitating. And beyond that, one thing that's really interesting when it comes to that type of goal oriented approach towards sex is that it can put a lot of pressure on your partner, right? And so this is why the percentage and prevalence of faking orgasm among women, especially, is so unfortunately high.
Mm-hmm.
And, in studies that have looked at faking orgasm, where women have been asked their reasons for doing so, the number one reason that they give is to protect my partner's feelings, right? Because I don't want to let my partner down. In other words, they know that their partner is putting so much pressure on themselves to feel like they're giving their woman an orgasm that they forget about the fact that sex is about communication and connection and play, and that you don't all, that it's not something where you have to achieve one single goal and that defines the whole experience. So I think that it's just about, understanding that sex is more like play than it is like work. And you need to get out of that work brain to understand that it's going to be silly and fun and not perfect. And that is really what makes it beautiful.
Amazing. No, this is incredibly helpful to the folks who are listening. And then let me ask with one kind of fun question here. So you have, I forget the exact statistic, but it's like the most popular course in like
Yes.
human history. Um, have you ever sat back over a glass of wine and contemplated not just how many lives you've changed, but how many lives you have helped to create through your work?
That is so kind. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope so. I mean, that is really, circling back, I mean, the reason that I ended up as a human sexuality professor came from a place where I was looking around at people who were severely lonely and disconnected and stressed out. That was my original goal coming out of graduate school. My PhD in psychology had set me up for a career where I wanted to help heal people from this sense of disconnection and loneliness in their lives. And it was really after this professor who taught the course before me fell and broke her leg. And suddenly I volunteered to be her replacement and understood, wow, helping people to become more sexually integrated and giving them this roadmap towards having more empowerment and a better understanding and sense of their sexuality and what they want. That is a way. It may not cure the entire loneliness epidemic, but it certainly is a way to introduce back connection into a person's life. And so that's really what I'm passionate about and what I'm hoping to do and what I'm praying this book will help many more people achieve in their own lives is bringing back this sense of connection in our lives in a domain that is so often under prioritized, but is so essential to our happiness.
Amazing. Nicole, this is great. Thank you for coming on the show and thank you
Thank
for the work that you
you.
do. This is great. And before you go, just remind the listeners again about your book and the content you create and how they can follow you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, the name of my book is You Could Be Having Better Sex, and it is out February 3rd, available for pre order now. And my work you can also follow on social media at Nicole underscore the sex professor, where I post lots of fun educational videos about sex.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Woo.